Hi everyone, and welcome to Scicomm Monday. I'm your host, Nicole Wood. Thank you to everyone for sticking around today as we had some technical difficulties with Periscope producer. So we're, for the first time ever, doing Scicomm Monday live through Facebook Live. So please bear with us as we have a gazillion screens going on, even more than what we normally have for the broadcast. So we're jumping around. We're trying to make sure that we get everyone's questions coming in. So during the broadcast, if you do have any questions for myself or today's guest, definitely please send them in via the chat module here on Facebook Live. I got to make sure I say Facebook Live rather than Periscope Live, because that's what I'm going to be tempted to say all day today. But send those questions in. If we aren't able to get to your questions during the broadcast, please send them in via our various Twitter handles. So you can reach me either at the broadcast handle of Scicomm Monday or at my personal handle of WildlifeBioGal. And so today's guest is Taylor Goelz. Yes, I got to make sure I say it right. So, but she's a student at Virginia Institute of Marine Science and also the College of William and Mary. And so with that, I'm gonna, and you can reach her at the handle of Twitter Taylor, which is very easy to remember for all of us who like Twitter. So Taylor, thank you for sticking around and seeing if we could actually get this broadcast to happen today. This is gonna be a very fun experiment, having never done the streaming through Facebook Live. I've done Facebook Live just straight through my phone, but never having to do it, via the additional live stream, process through there. So thank you for sticking around through all the technical difficulties, and just thank you in general for coming on the broadcast today.
Yeah, anytime. Anything live is going to be a challenge. So yeah, let's go.
Yeah, that's one of the fun things when you're riding the wave of new technology. Sometimes there are going to be those issues, and so
hiccups.
But yeah, that's what makes it half the fun, is getting to troubleshoot with all this and see if we can make it work. And hey, you never know, this might lead to more broadcast on Facebook Live if everyone likes being able to use this particular platform versus just using Periscope, because I think what more of the public out there is probably more prone to use Facebook, and that's one of the things that you really work with a lot is different stakeholders and stuff. So you might see more of your particular audience on Facebook versus Twitter. Is that something that you see a lot of?
Yeah, definitely. For a lot of my research, I have to keep up to date with what the different associations are doing in and around the Chesapeake Bay. So the watermen's associations, a lot of them all have Facebook pages, which I can follow and then track and see how they react to articles that get posted or to different legislation. And so it's actually a really easy way. They just pop up in my stream, and I'm able to follow and see what the different groups are interested in from the comfort of Facebook, which is really nice.
Do you find that a lot of groups are using social media? The different stakeholders that you work with are using social media, or are they still kind of more those traditional methods of, say, like the newsletter that they pass around, or other maybe what we might consider old school ways of communicating with each other?
I think it's definitely updating, especially as more and more younger people get into all of these different stakeholder groups, not just watermen, but into the environmental groups or into seafood buyers or into the government, that like Maryland Department of Natural Resources has a Twitter and a Facebook page and all these things that you wouldn't really expect. The Phillips Wharf's Environmental Center, which is on the eastern shore of Maryland, has a really heavy Facebook presence and online presence. And I think they're realizing that in order to reach different audiences and more diverse audiences, they have to diversify their messages or how they get their messages out a little bit.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I see a lot of is seems to be that increase with people, being online and their ability to get that information. I just, using my parents, for example, my dad has a Twitter account and both of my parents are able to follow me on Periscope and, watch the videos. And if you had, told me even 2 years ago that they were, able to do that, I would have just kind of chuckled and be like, sure, but they're able to learn it and do it. And so anybody else, can as well. So it's not just, I think, the younger generation, they might be more prone to use it, but the older generations are, getting up to speed with how to use it and actually really enjoying, the different features that social media has with communication.
Yep, you definitely can't count them out anymore.
So with your work that you do, you have the unusual thing of being a dual master's student. So you're not only at
Yes.
the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, but you're also at the College of William and Mary. So can you tell us, how did that come about that you're doing 2 degrees at once and how that works with the project that you're working on?
Yeah, so VIMS is actually, the Virginia Institute of Marine Science is a grad program within the College of William and Mary, but we always think of ourselves as a little bit separate because VIMS was a fisheries institute before it was a part of William and Mary. It's in the Virginia state constitution, and some of the VIMS plays an advising role in a lot of fisheries for the state of Virginia. So it didn't hop on board to be a part of Team William and Mary until later on in its existence. But it's nice that being part of both, that I can do my marine science degree at VIMS and then do a degree in public policy at William and Mary and still be kind of housed under the same roof, but get to take advantage of the expertise in both sides of it. And it is complicated because the stuff that I'm learning at policy and then the stuff that I'm learning at VIMS isn't even exactly what my thesis project is, so I get to add a whole new element on top of it and learn even more cool things, which anyone who knows me will know that I don't say no to things quite very easily, and I love, everything is so interesting to me, and so it's good and bad that I get to look at all these different things and get to explore the Chesapeake Bay in so many different ways, from the policy view, from the science view, from the social science view.
Yeah, I know that's one of the biggest things that I've had problems with, or trouble with during my grad adventures, is learning to say no. I'm always like, oh, well, that sounds interesting. Yeah, I can do that too.
Mm-hmm.
And next thing I know, I'm up to 3 a.m. every night trying to get everything done. I think that would be something that a lot of students could get lessons on, is, being able to just focus on a few things and getting through, and then, taking on all those additional things afterwards. Because it is great to be involved with so many things. It gives you so many opportunities. It is, at the point too where you can stretch yourself so thin.
Yeah, what me and some of my other grad student friends are kind of realizing is that you have to pick kind of a suite of things that are within one area and kind of brand yourself in those ways and pick activities that fit with what you're interested in, obviously, and that give you the chance to use some skills that you might not develop during your graduate research, but that you don't overwhelm yourself and that you still have time for fun, which is, I think, something that's coming into the science world more often, is this balance that it's really refreshing to see within the newer generation, I hope. So.
Yeah, very true. And it's, it's nice too with having things like social media where you can reach out and connect to other people that you might not have been able to talk to otherwise, and see how different institutions, different students, different colleagues are doing their programs and how they're able to manage their time, and gives you at least, more chances to have potential templates that you can copy for your own program.
it's nice because sometimes you think it's like, oh, this is just me. This is just me that is dealing with this or trying to figure this out. And so that's one of the big things about social media is that you can see like, oh, that this isn't just me. And that has it's a gratifying feeling for a lot of people, I think, me included.
Yeah, I know I'm right there with you with that. Like it's been so nice to be able to communicate with people all over the world, to be able to say like, how are you doing this? Oh, that's how you do it? Oh, okay, good. I'm not alone, because we're a very small section of our program is wildlife. And so I don't know how many people you have at your university that are dealing with, the issues that you work with, but sometimes it's nice to be able to branch out and talk to other colleagues that before you would have had to send letters or call, and it's just, it eases the communication process.
Exactly.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about the issues with oyster fishery in the Chesapeake Bay, because I have to admit, I really don't know much about it until I started talking to you. Like when you sent me that video on oyster tonguing, the patent tonguing, I at first thought you were saying oyster tonguing. I was like, what is oyster tonguing? So that's where my expertise is in this. So if you could bring not only myself but everyone else listening up to speed of what are the big issues with oyster fisheries there, how do they even fish for it, say the tonguing, and basically just give us a quick rundown on everything.
Yeah, you were probably not alone there. I moved to Virginia from Arizona, and so I had to come in completely green and learn everything kind of on the fly, which has been fantastic. But so the eastern oyster is the native oyster to the Chesapeake Bay region. Crassioteria virginica even, so it's named, you get that nice Latin name, Virginia, even in there. It at one point was the largest fishery within the Chesapeake Bay. It's dropped down to number 2 now because of intense disease and overharvesting issues that have really taken place over the past 100 years plus now, that oysters are predicted to be at about 1% of their historic levels. You can see this picture that oyster bars used to be larger than ships, that John Smith, when he came into the Chesapeake Bay way back when, Pocahontas fame, commented on them and how they were navigational hazards and how that's not really an issue anymore. You can see Maryland, the commercial harvest is definitely dropped down from 1939 even to 2011. If that chart went further back, you would see even a more drastic decline. And it's the same story in Virginia, just the different states. And that's one of the really interesting things about the management of oysters too, is that you have Virginia and Maryland plus the Potomac River, plus the watershed of the Chesapeake Bay goes all the way up into Pennsylvania, into West Virginia, into Delaware, that you have all of these other states that feed into this system, that a farmer in Pennsylvania, the way that he manages his farm can impact the health of the bay and then can impact oysters within the Chesapeake Bay, which is really mind-boggling.
Yeah, this I know with us up here in the Great Lakes, it's always interesting to see how far out from the actual lake itself our impacts felt. It could be something in the middle of the Michigan Mitten, that that river is flowing out to the lakes, and how that can impact all the way down through going out to the St. Lawrence Seaways. So it's always, you have to think beyond just the system that you're in, because there's so many things that impact that. So you're saying with the Chesapeake.
Yeah, definitely. And the scope of it is interesting, but also you think, okay, there's the state of Virginia, the state of Maryland, but then there's localities within those states, and a bunch of groups that make up those localities that all have different interests and that all have things that they think are important about the bay, or things they want to get out of the bay, whether that's a commercial fishery, a recreational fishery, recreation in general. And so finding a way to balance all of those stakeholder thoughts is kind of what management is about, and what our research project is really looking into.
So I know that there is this oyster futures stakeholder group that you had been talking about. So can you explain who's part of this oyster futures group, what the stakeholders are that are a part of that, and then how you guys are troubleshooting the issues with oysters.
Yeah, so Oyster Futures was started by a team of scientists at the University of Maryland at Horn Point and at UMCES, which is out on the Eastern Shore, and VIMS. We're part of the VIMS team, and we're looking at a participatory modeling process in order to look at oysters within the Choptank River, which is on the eastern shore of the Maryland portion of the Chesapeake Bay. And you can see the whole group of us there. It's a mix of scientists that have all different specialties, of watermen from Talbot and Dorchester counties, of the two counties that border the river. We have seafood buyers, we have aquaculturists, we have representatives from Maryland Department of Natural Resources, and there's more groups that I'm not remembering, but it's the opportunity for these stakeholders to come together and to look at the science that is going into a model. So when you see the most probably common model that people can think of are like hurricanes or the climate change models that show the big rise in temperature or something like that, but data goes into those models and gets fed into those models in order to get those end results. And so this participatory modeling process, the stakeholders get to see the data that goes into it and gets to understand better how that process works, and then using that model and the data that they all decide to put into it, they can make decisions on how they think that oysters should be managed within the Choptank.
So what do you think is the biggest issue right now with oysters? Is it the overfishing of them? Is it, the climate change? Like, what's the biggest thing that's truly like impacting the fishery right now?
Oh, naming one.
Even though
biggest,
we all know it's multiple things, but like, what's like the big buzz one that you would say like, okay, this is the thing that we definitely need to tackle first?
The low levels of oysters right now, that 1% level, is probably the biggest thing at the moment, and that's due to both disease and overharvesting. Disease ravaged oysters in the early 2000s, late 90s, and that coupled with harvest pressure brought those levels down. And with lower levels of oysters, they are broadcast spawners, and so they send the little baby oysters into the water, and if there's not enough of them and they're not close enough, then you can't reproduce as easily, and then you don't get oysters to settle. And they preferentially, it's been shown, will settle on oyster reefs, and so if there's not enough oysters and oyster reefs and they have nowhere to settle, that's part of the thing that there's a lot of oyster restoration going on, so they're building reefs in order to provide more of that hard substrate, and they're finding that other substrates are working just as well as oyster shell, which is kind of nice because shell is a huge limiting factor because we don't have enough oysters that are reproducing and settling and growing. That it's a numbers game right now, I think, is a big part of it.
So with like having like that reduced population, how is that impacting the economics? Because you're talking about the watermen there. I'm assuming a lot of them really depend on it for their livelihoods. Is there that pressure from the watermen to want to be able to keep that harvest high, but from the scientists, environmentalists saying, hey, we need to back off so that way it can recover? And how is that going with that dialogue between those groups?
Yeah, watermen have been doing better the past few years because, unfortunately, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill that happened off the Gulf Coast, that kind of decimated, for the time at least, the Gulf Coast oyster fishery, and so then watermen within this region saw oyster prices go up and demand go up, so they were able to kind of ride that wave of nice high prices, which they know and everyone knows isn't going to last forever once the Gulf Coast oyster fishery gets itself back up. But yeah, it's a classic conflict, but sometimes the sides aren't so clear, and the states have different approaches to how they manage things. Virginia has done a lot of bottom leasing and has been really on top of aquaculture, whereas Maryland has chosen to go the more sanctuary route. 25% of the waters in the Maryland portion of the Chesapeake Bay are in sanctuaries in order to help promote growth. And both Virginia and Maryland are doing pretty large-scale oyster restoration right now. That there's the Chesapeake Bay Agreement, which was signed. It's been signed a bunch of times, most recently in 2014, and it's working towards this goal of fully restoring 10 tributaries by 2025. So that's happening in both states, and so you have 3 tributaries in each right now, with 2 more to come in each state, that are hoping to build this hard substrate, plant spat, which is baby oysters, in order to help the populations recover. And it's been showing some success, and so kind of if you build it, they will come is what a lot of the restoration thoughts are right now.
Is there any thought of limiting the different ways that you can collect oysters? Like you sent me the video of patent tonging. How, like, what other ways are there? Like I was able to find, like, there's hand tonging. Is there other different ways of collecting? And I'll throw up some videos here for everyone to be able to see like what these different things are when we're talking about when it comes to the patent tonging and hand tonging here.
Yeah, right now in both states, there's regions where certain gear types are allowed or disallowed in certain types of the year, and that's some of the management options that are always have been discussed about maybe limiting places to just hand tonging versus dredging versus patent tonging, which some scientists say can be a little more destructive towards the bottom because you're kind of tearing up that whole bottom community, which could impact not only oyster reefs but submerged aquatic vegetation, seagrasses, and so this is a patent tong, I think, so it's kind of like salad tongs, like you're picking up a salad but you're picking up oysters, and this is a mechanic version, whereas there's literally like giant salad tong sticks that some watermen use in order to harvest oysters that way. And then dredges that's pretty common in a lot of other fisheries, that you can just put a dredge down at the bottom and harvest up all the oysters growing on the bottom. And Chesapeake Bay itself isn't really that deep, and oysters are typically found higher up in the water column. There can be some pretty deep too, so harvesting them isn't really that much of an issue. It is arduous. I would not want to be out there hand tonging all day or doing any of this. I have so much respect for the people that do this commercially and recreationally. It's amazing, and this is how it's been done for 100+ years. There used to be more, there were some sailboats that would go out and harvest as well, which isn't as common these days, called skipjacks, which are very synonymous with the Chesapeake Bay. But the tonging and the dredging are the most common ones, I would say, these days.
Yeah, looking at the videos of the different types of collecting system for oysters, it does seem like it would be very destructive to the sediment there. Is there any other species that could be damaged, by the collection of oysters that maybe people don't necessarily think about?
Yeah, there's clams in the bay. There's mussels. The oyster reefs aren't just where oysters grow. They act as habitat for a bunch of other species. So any species that use the oyster reefs as nurseries or as foraging grounds, if the dredge or the patent tong comes through, then they can get disturbed and can either get caught, which is a little less likely, or have to move somewhere else. And there's lots of little critters probably in the sediment that I don't know as much about, but that definitely have an impact, that any fishing practice is going to have an impact on the bottom. And so it's just a way to kind of manage your space. There's been a lot of GIS mapping that's been happening in the bay that's showing where different habitats are and where fishing areas, to try to help mitigate some of those issues. That NOAA is doing a lot of that, VIMS is doing a lot of that.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think sometimes, like, we forget about. We get so focused on a certain species that we forget sometimes that there's multiple species that can be impacted by the bycatch and other things out there. Yeah, blue crab, which is the biggest fishery within the Chesapeake Bay, uses oyster grounds as nursery grounds. Striped bass, which are another big synonymous species. All these species use the oysters. So when you're looking at doing any sort of, if you want to know the value of your oyster reefs, you have to consider something beyond the commercial value of the oysters themselves. Yeah, for sure. So are there other benefits that oysters have besides just the economics of and the deliciousness of eating them? What services do they provide the bay besides, providing habitat from the oyster reefs? Like, do they filter the water column through there?
Yep. Oh, yeah, oysters are filter feeders, and so it was said back in the day when there was all those oysters that John Smith was talking about that they used to be able to filter the whole bay in 4 days, which is pretty incredible thinking about. And now I think experts have estimated it takes over a year to do the same amount of filtration just because of the worsened water quality and the decrease in the amount of oysters. But can look online and see like pictures of water with oysters and without oysters, and it's really can be a big juxtaposition, and that's one of the big habitat services other than habitat. I think the water filtration is probably a really big one.
Yeah, I know up in the Great Lakes, we're having an issue because we have so many invasive mussels that they're over filtering the water up here, and it's leaving it so that there's no plankton for the native fish and other inverts that live here. And so like we're almost running into the opposite issue of where it's just like it's gone above and beyond, and then thus it's also not leaving any for the native mussels that are up here. So yeah, it looks pretty when it's all nice and clear out in the lake, but it isn't always supposed to be.
Exactly. Yeah.
But of course, you don't want it how it might be in the Chesapeake Bay where it's like it's just completely turbid and you can't even see anything because there just isn't enough there to properly filter.
Yeah, there are times of the year when it's worse than others, and it depends on how much freshwater flow comes into the bay and winds and currents, and that all kind of decides it. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation, which is a nonprofit in the region, gives the bay a grade every year for how well it's doing, and last year was the highest that it's been graded in a long time. So it is getting better. All the management practices that the states and the localities are implementing we're working our way towards improvement, but it's always that the first changes are pretty easy, that you're able to implement things and change things, and it's the last little bit that can be difficult. So I think I've seen a lot of great work that's happened here just in the few years that I've been here, and I know that it's going to continue from all the really incredible and diverse work that I've seen people doing here, that it's you can learn so many things from so many different pieces of the estuary.
Yeah, do you find with your work with the different stakeholders that they're becoming more and more knowledgeable about those issues and thus are willing to do those extra steps to help protect the health of the bay?
I think it's a combination of making information available, and as the science comes out, and being able to accurately and succinctly describe it to people and to let them know how it can be applicable to them, but also taking advantage of the immense amounts of local ecological knowledge that exists within the bay, that these watermen have worked on the Chesapeake Bay and their rivers and their regions for longer than I have been alive, times like 2. So definitely coming in there and acting like everything is not the way to go. And so it's a nice balance, I think, that what Oyster Futures is trying to do, and other management throughout the region is trying to balance that scientific knowledge and the local ecological knowledge to come together to kind of create a nice coupling for the management of oysters and for the health of the whole bay.
Yeah, I think you made a really good point there of reminding us all that sometimes it's very easy to come in as grad students or new researchers to an area and think that we know everything about it because we know all the scientific knowledge, but there is that big, huge depth of knowledge that the local communities have from having lived there through multiple generations, and have that knowledge base that while it might not have its hardcore science behind it, it definitely has that experience of those years of knowledge that can help benefit the local area, and then also it can help benefit our science too.
Yep. A great science read if anyone's interested. Beautiful Swimmers about blue crabs in the Chesapeake Bay. It was published back in the 70s, and the author went out with watermen and got to learn kind of everything that they had to teach him. And so if you're looking for a good science read for your summer beaches, then look it up on Amazon. It's so great.
Yeah, I definitely will have to do that. I'm always looking for new science-based books to read through, so I definitely will add that one to the list. So I think another issue that we've been hearing about when it comes to the Chesapeake Bay area is about climate change.
Hmm.
And it was in the news recently how President Trump called down to one of the local mayors there and said, "Hey, don't worry about climate change. You know, your island's going to be there forever." Okay, tell us the real story. How is climate change impacting the islands and the bay down there? Is it really like, are you seeing true sea level rise? You know, are there islands disappearing? You know, what's the story?
So second to only the Gulf Coast region, the Hampton Roads area in Virginia, and this kind of mid-Atlantic region is the second highest rate of sea level rise for the entire United States. So it's definitely a big and pressing issue in this region, and we've already started to see changes. Tangier Island, which is the island that the president called down to, is really interesting in that it has a lot of history behind it, and so a lot of people want to protect it for that reason, but it is being inundated by rising sea levels, and the U.S. Army Corps and other groups are trying to figure out ways that they could mitigate this and save islands. And oysters are a big part of a lot of solutions to that, because their growth, when they're kind of functioning at full steam, can outpace sea level rise. So they have that shoreline protection value too, which is really crucial when you're kind of looking at reinvesting in living shorelines and helping out with that. But it's not just watermen and waterfront seafront owners, but the military has a huge presence in the Hampton Roads region, and so Norfolk district has we have all the branches in and around the Virginia area. So a lot of people are interested in this. It's not just scientists. It's not just climate change believers that are really interested in all of this. It's everyone is realizing that regardless of what is actually causing this in their minds, we're seeing this recurrent flooding, and we, as a community, are going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, I know that there's been talk up here in the Great Lakes about climate change and stuff, but we aren't having so much of the flooding issue up here because we're not seeing the impacts necessarily from those sea levels. And I think that's something too that a lot of folks forget, is that it actually is happening in the U.S., those sea level impacts. Like, we hear the stories of, oh, the Pacific Island is disappearing. Well, there's islands and shoreline disappearing in the U.S. too, and trying to remind everyone about that. So how good is the government been, your local government, your state government, been with helping to support, funding? Because I know in the Great Lakes we have our Great Lakes restoration initiative that could be on the chopping block for $300 million. So they're going to completely wipe out all of our funding to study the Great Lakes. I heard the Chesapeake Bay area is going to have the same issue of their funding being cut. So like, how supportive is the local governments, with trying to make sure that funding doesn't get cut?
Yeah, the Chesapeake Bay program, which handles a bunch of different issues within Chesapeake Bay. It's made up of a lot of different partners that includes NOAA and the National Fish and Wildlife and Forestry Service and EPA, among others. That program got cut to zero, and that is definitely, if that were to follow through, that would be detrimental for a lot of the oyster restoration that's happening and some of the watershed implementation plans that are coming through. But the states individually have their own funding as well. It would definitely be a blow, but local communities are, small-scale projects are making a big difference in areas too. It's detrimental not only just for that program, but grad students could not get funded as much. The universities in this area couldn't get funded as much. So it's definitely something that everyone is definitely paying attention to. And we are lucky that we're close to DC, and we can go talk to our representatives and senators and tell them why we think that science funding is important.
Yeah, like you sent me this image here of you talking to Senator Tim Kaine, and so that's
Yeah.
going to be great to be able to have that one-on-one time with someone who is going to help establish those policies and get those laws passed to make sure that funding is still there for those issues.
Yeah, he came down to VIMS to talk about coastal development and development of rural areas, which is a big issue that a lot of areas, which I didn't realize within Virginia, have trouble getting Wi-Fi and have trouble getting like high-speed internet. And so the talking was a lot about that, and a lot of those counties are historic and are on the water, and so there's just all these competing interests that you have to think about, that it's not just sea level rise, but it's that these people might not have access to internet too, and that might be more of a pressing problem, and it's balancing all those things. And Senator Kaine and a lot of our other representatives are really good at listening to all those different voices and coming through with supporting their region and the Chesapeake Bay.
Yeah, and that has the issue too of where that could cause, we use a lot of science communication to get a hold of people. If they don't have that access to Wi-Fi and high-speed internet, they might not be able to hear some of the messaging that you're sending out via Facebook or Twitter or other ways. Like, they wouldn't be able to watch this broadcast today. So
it's really incredible because VIMS is located in Gloucester County in Virginia, and so just like 25, 30 miles away, like once you get further inland, that you're in these areas that have difficulty with this because providers just won't go into those regions. And that's why it's cool that VIMS has all of these great events that they host throughout the year. Marine Science Day is like a big thing where they get thousands of people to come to campus to get to learn all about marine science and tour the labs and go out on boats. And I think that VIMS is a really vital part of that community because they provide a service that wouldn't be available otherwise in this region, and that we have this top-rate institution in a kind of unexpected place, but that makes it even more special, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely a good way you can personally reach those folks, in person, almost, in those one-on-one kind of settings where you can talk to them and showcase all the great work you're doing. So as we're running out of time here, because I know with the delay in the broadcast, we got to get you out of here. What is like the last big thing that you want to be able to talk to everyone about the issues with oysters and policy in the Chesapeake for everyone to hear?
That knowing not only how your science impacts the science community is important, but knowing how it impacts the rest of your community, how it affects your local governance, how policy could impact it, how you could impact policy with your science, I think is a huge thing that a lot of scientists need to consider when you're thinking about your so what, your conclusions for your findings. Think about how it could impact any local ordinance or local legislation, and then talk to your representatives about that. Write them letters about what you do and send them tweets and send them emails, and you'll be surprised how many more people you can get interested in it than just the readers of science and of nature. And it's an amazing thing to be able to advocate for something that you love.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point there that you said about advocating for our science and advocating for the environments that we study, because I think there has been so much of that where we should just be scientists, but I think we're seeing in the way that the communities have been going that we also need to be advocates too, to be able to help spread what it is that we're doing to everyone, because we can't depend on our universities or other folks. We have to go out and do it ourselves, so that way the message of our science can reach everybody.
Yep, no one knows your topic or loves your topic more than you do.
All right, great point. Well, with that, I'm gonna say thank you to Taylor for coming on and dealing with all of the fun technical issues and being a part of our first Facebook live stream that we had here. So this was a fun experiment, and if everyone out there enjoyed it, definitely let us know, and maybe we'll do some more Facebook live streams as well. Maybe this is the start to something new. So I don't know, it's always fun when something goes wrong, but it leads to something really great. So. So thank you again for being on with us. I really appreciate it. It was good to hear the issues with policy and with the Chesapeake Bay, since there's so many different problems and complications with the science down there.
Yep, opportunities for solutions. It's going to be good.
So if you want to get a hold of Taylor, feel free to tweet her at her handle, Tweeter Taylor. I've got to make sure I get that right. I always want to say Twitter. But so feel free to tweet her if you've got any additional questions afterwards, because obviously we're on a different platform today, so the number of questions coming through is limited as people are trying to figure out where we're at and what time we were at today. And then if you have any questions for myself or the broadcast, feel free to tweet me at Scicomm Monday or at my personal handle of WildlifeBioGal. And then a reminder for next week, we'll be talking to a professor from Doane University, Ramesh Lagani. He's known by Dr. Ram Bio on Twitter, and we'll be talking about how burning plant materials can actually help sequester carbon even better into soils. And for all of our Patreon sponsors out there, I want to send a big thank you for helping to sponsor the broadcast. Your support really does help make this broadcast possible. And if you enjoyed what you were watching today, please go to our Patreon site and help fund the broadcast. Any support you can provide definitely helps make things a little better. Helps us with the all the nice text, so that way we can figure out how to make these broadcasts happen. And then with that, I just want to say a big thank you again to everyone for tuning in and for having fun as we broadcasted on Facebook Live for the first time. And so please, for everyone, go out, explore, do some science, have some fun, and hopefully we'll see you on the next Scicomm Monday.